Hello, welcome to Math for All, where we strive to make math creative, curious, and inclusive for everyone. I'm Molly Vokey.
And I'm Heidi Subnani. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are really excited to speak with our guest, Dr. Brianna Kurtz, and she is going to talk to us about lessons from the pandemic that we can carry forward in math education. And so we are really excited to get into this topic.
Yes. Definitely. If anybody is watching, please follow our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook. And you can always see what our next guest is and all the fun things that we are doing. And I am going to introduce our guest today. So Dr. Brianna Kurtz is an assistant professor at Mary Baldwin University in Staunton, Virginia. She is passionate. Oh my goodness, this has been a long day. I've been saying all day that I thought that it was Thursday and that tomorrow is Friday. And that is becoming very evident right now. Okay. She's passionate in global and international issues within STEM education. Prior to the completion of her doctoral studies at the University of Central Florida, Dr. Statistics instructor for over a decade at Daytona State College and additionally taught. She additionally holds an MS in mathematics, with focuses in applied mathematics and statistics from the University of Nevada, Reno, and a BS in engineering sciences from Vanderbilt University. Through her years in education, Dr. Kurtz has received 3 Excellence in Teaching Awards and has served as the co-pi in, I don't even know if I said that right, this is pathetic, on an NSF grant to mentor and advise students from underrepresented backgrounds in STEM education. When taking a break from the world of mathematics and statistics, Dr. Kurtz is an avid triathlete, inline skater, and a musician. So let's have Dr. Kurtz come on in.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
We're happy that you're here.
Thank you.
Such a diverse background and lots of interests.
Yes. Well, there's math can only be one piece of the puzzle. You got to find the math and everything,
That's
right?
Right. So. Yep, that's right. That's right.
That idea of like being skilled in 3, like I'm always impressed with, I have a couple of friends who also do triathletes and I'm always impressed because it would be nice if I could do one of those things. All of those things.
Well, the triathlon motto is why be mediocre in one sport when you can be mediocre in 3. So there's a lot of self-deprecation involved there.
Well, hey, the fact that you're doing it is impressive.
That's right. That's right.
So we love to start with the question, what is your math story? It just helps everyone know a little bit about why math and why you do what you do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, for me, it's definitely been maybe a bit of a nonlinear journey, as it has been, I think, for many educators.
Yep.
That when I think about mathematics too, during my elementary school years, especially, we moved as a family quite a bit. I went to 3 different elementary schools in 3 states, and in doing that, there was a lot of shifting and changing, and different cultures and environments to get used to. I was in suburban areas. I was in more rural areas. But the math kind of stayed, felt that to me that at that time, as a child, it stayed consistent. And that was something that, that I could count on, that seemed to be something I could grasp. It would be definitive. And that carried me through. I was very fortunate once we did settle in Roanoke, Virginia for the remainder of my education, that I went to a specialized high school half day for math, science, and technology. And that just bred so much love for me. You would go in the morning. It was a very, very small environment. And then in the afternoon, you went back to your zoned high school for all your other activities.
Wow.
And it was just a beautiful program to be a part of. And through that, they really harnessed a lot of math and science love. And I remember with that group, something that was special that I didn't realize at the time how special it was that There are 36 of us in the grade, and we were 50-50 male, female.
Wow.
It just happened.
Unusual, yeah, for that time.
Yes. And we didn't know it was unusual till
Wow.
we went off to colleges and universities, and we're like, oh, that was different. So through university, I majored in engineering, very quickly realized I didn't like the practice of engineering as much as I loved the information, got involved in a lot of teaching and tutoring, and ended up getting a master's in mathematics at the University of Nevada, Reno. And that's where my teaching love really took off while I was getting my master's, just because there was an ad in the paper. I went and signed up to substitute teach. Now, again, this is in times before some of
Yes. You said an ad in the paper.
the ad in the paper, yes, was there for
'Cause
substitute
we've all been there
teaching.
and looked. Yes,
Yeah,
we're all
so
dating ourselves.
I drove to Carson City and handed in person my application, and I started driving back from there, and I got a call on my cell phone and said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I didn't have plans at that point. So she said, "Okay, great. You're teaching first grade tomorrow at Empire Elementary School. You should probably figure out where that is." And when I got there the next day, no lesson plan had been left. And I had a group of first graders in front of me. And that was my first day being in charge of a classroom. And from there, I was thinking, like, okay, I can get with this education thing, but I have a lot to learn. So I knew I loved mathematics, pursued the master's, and ended up going over to Florida to teach at a community college, and Daytona State College is its name. And I taught mathematics there for over a decade. And I taught everything from pre-algebra, adults who were coming to college for the first time or on a return, through the calculuses and everything in between. Developed a huge love and passion for statistics that started at University of Nevada, Reno, but definitely blossomed with the teaching of statistics. But something that I really noticed while being at the community college level was how many of my students had faced educational interruptions, and that had brought them to the community college. So being in Florida, interruptions for natural disasters and weather related phenomena is just something that you kind of roll with. Hurricane days just come, and they always come at the beginning of the semester or the beginning of the academic year. So you learn very quickly how to adapt, and how to come back and be out again. But what was interesting to me was some of my students had been out for much longer. I had a lot of students at that level who'd been out for major medical issues, who had been out due to displacement by having refugee or immigration status, and those who had just faced interruptions for purposes of family. And then, as it happened, I myself had a medical issue and faced my own interruption when I decided to start a doctorate program and had to then back away from that. When I came back into the University of Central Florida to pursue that doctorate degree, I knew I wanted to do it in math education, and specifically to look at statistics, because I just love so much to do with statistics. But I wanted to look specifically at how populations who had faced natural disaster interruptions, or interruptions for anything really, responded, and how people around the world were looking at ways to make math education possible, and thrive, instead of looking at interruption as something that is a detriment. So I worked with students who had been displaced to Florida schools by Hurricane Maria, from Puerto Rico, and worked on ways to develop translingual interventions with a mentoring model to get them on track with their math education. Now, keep in mind, this was a very different time than it is now. This was the year 2019. So I
How sad is that? That it was
yes,
a very
so
different time 2 years
yes,
ago.
it was a very different time. So, I discussed my research with a lot of people. And I do remember one particular conference I was at in February of 2020. And I will not name names at all, but I had one uh, uh, an academic who I admired very much actually came to hear my talk, and I was amazed because there was maybe 5 people in the room. It was one of those, and he said to me, he's like, he's like, the work's interesting. And he's like, we don't really talk a lot about education interruptions. He's like, that's pretty niche. I don't know really how much traction you're going to get and how much people are really
Are
going
you
to
saying you caused
care
the pandemic?
about it. Well, this is February. And I was just, I felt a little dejected, but I was like, okay, people don't really care about interruptions, but I get it. It's not something we've really faced in the US as much as other nations. I rolled with it, licked my wounds at the Grand Canyon. And then a calendar changed and it was March. And all of a sudden the conversation became very relevant in math
Mhm,
education in a way that it hadn't before.
mhm.
So, and that kind of brings us to a lot of where we're getting into now. So,
Right.
a colleague of mine and I tried to quickly develop a website of resources to help teachers right at the start in math education to go remote. But then it's been very interesting to see where we have gone since that time. And what lessons we've learned and where we're going right now.
Mhm.
So that's the Reader's Digest version of my math story.
Yeah.
Well, that's a fascinating math story. I had so many questions. I should have written them down. But I think it's so interesting that you started substitute. I'm going to take this down for a second. Substitute teaching, and that funny story about you going in on the first day with no sub plans actually made you want to teach. That's kind of incredible.
It's kind of usually the opposite of that. People are like,
I know. I
okay,
was going to
and
say
done.
some people would go running.
Like, I'm sorry, you want me to do what? With
Well, luckily that first grade class was very excited to have me that day. And, so shout out to Empire Elementary School in
Mhm.
Carson City, Nevada for getting my start. So,
That's
but
amazing.
it definitely launched me into really knowing that education was something I wanted to pursue, and I also wanted to taste as much of the pre-K through 12 world as I could in
Mhm,
addition to the collegiate level.
mhm.
Yeah, that's wild.
I want to come
It's
back around to statistics because I have a
Yeah.
question about like statistics education and its place
Mhm.
in our curriculum, particularly K-12.
Yes.
But we'll
well,
start with
let's
the
have her
main
talk about this.
question.
But that is super. I know she talks about statistics like it's like a good chocolate cake.
It is. It is the best chocolate cakes. But it's also the chocolate cake that, like, is in the special case that sometimes people don't go to, and it's
Mhm.
like you gotta get the
Yes,
nod
which
to
is
get there.
exactly why Heidi wants to ask a question about that. I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it.
Yes, a little bit.
Yeah. But so the main question we're going to be talking about today, as she led into it so beautifully, is now that we're back, in person, what lessons from the pandemic do we want to carry forward in math education?
So it's interesting. I feel like just like we've gone through waves of COVID, we've definitely gone through waves of what's happening in education and specifically in math education since the
Mhm.
pandemic started. Speaking about the research just briefly here and not to go too deep into it, but with research has been done with educational interruptions in the past, looking at all subjects. The one that usually suffers the most during times of educational interruptions is mathematics, followed second by science. And there's been a lot of different hypotheses as to why this may be so. A lot to do with lack of home support or lack of resources being provided for home support. The option for delivery methods and access is not always the same for mathematics as it can be for other subjects. I'll give you an example of the Ebola epidemic for a
Mhm.
second, because that was one of the last times, at least globally, that we saw at least a very large region have an interruption.
Mhm.
When Ebola hit Western Africa, what many of the teachers then did, as well as public officials, was turn to their public radio systems in Liberia and Sierra Leone to broadcast lessons through radio for students to be doing. It works beautifully with read along and write along. It becomes a little bit trickier to verbally describe mathematics in a way that resonates. So, some was seen there is also been seen in studies in the Caribbean during times of extended interruptions due to hurricanes about triaging mathematics. Um, through the United Nations School in a Box program, which goes across the world in times of education disaster interruption to provide tools and resources and set up tent schools across the world. Most of those resources, again, are focused on reading and writing, and mathematics is just starting to get put into those. So, what we are seeing is a global trend that mathematics often gets left for later when everyone's back fully. Now, I think what we have seen during the times of COVID is that idea of being back fully is still something that is taking shape. We're having students in and out constantly, and we're having teachers that are having to teach still online, hybrid, high flex formats, and being back in person. Now, for those who are truly in person and having that interruption, unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lot of the standards that maybe weren't tested last year. Instead, and speaking specifically about the United States here, because different nations have had different responses. But what we are seeing is that kind of doubling up. And instead of approaching math education with a level of kindness or purposefully choosing problems or purposely pairing together different standards that can be accomplished in unison, we're instead going for not doing any kind of changes and trying to dump in more. And there's so much that we can take from what we have done that is getting lost right now, and it's unfortunate. So looking at things that have worked, going all the way down to the bare bones pieces, we saw so much technology that got used during the pandemic to encourage students who maybe before weren't or a bit shy about asking questions to actually feel comfortable. Private chat functions through classes were enormously helpful in getting some of our learners to actually jump out there and say when they had an issue, but didn't want to say it in person. So, looking for ways that we can transition that into all classrooms and not just mathematics. Now, looking specifically with mathematics and the different virtual manipulatives that have come out there, the library of virtual manipulatives, of course, has been in, I say, in the realm forever, but it's being used in ways that it hasn't before. Unfortunately, there's a lot of tools in the library of virtual manipulatives with their applets that don't always go with all devices. And this is where different companies like Toy Theater have really picked up the ball and looked at different manipulatives that can be used, especially if they're concerned about, as some schools are, still asking teachers to disinfect or not to use things that are tangible. So we can still carry forward those virtual manipulatives. And looking at those as well for students who might have motor disabilities, that it makes it challenging in order to use those physical manipulatives, engaging in virtual manipulatives is extraordinary. When we're looking too at ways for teachers to get some of those shy learners to speak up, I know the Desmus activity builders have taken a life on in a way that they haven't before. And look at those specifically for mathematics, incorporating a lot of the tools where students can create graphs, comment on each other's graphs, and have a full teacher dashboard available so they can see where their students are at, can help with things that are at a home environment or online. But with all of these tools, they take time to work through and they take purposeful pairings. So, where this becomes a challenge is what the teachers, of course, are saying on ground. And I mean, the people listening tonight, I'm sure are teachers, but if I have administrators listening tonight too, to recognize what standards are being doubled or similar enough that they can be combined. Because if we approach our return by trying to checkbox everything that we didn't check last year and this year, we are doing a disservice to our students and our teachers. with mathematics, it is building.
Yeah.
But if we look at how different nations teach mathematics and go for a more modularization format where we're hitting less information but more in depth, our students are going to get that conceptual knowledge. And we started doing an interesting job of it at the end of the pandemic when we started letting go because we had to.
Mhm.
Now the view is, well, we don't have to let go because we're back, so we can just double up everything we did.
Mhm.
And nobody has learned mathematics education well by fire hose. So ways that we can
No,
move the fire hose.
that is so true. And I feel like part of the problem is, and I don't know if both of you agree, but teachers last year that we worked with were exhausted,
Mhm.
learning every minute of the day they were learning. And then now that we're back, so, kind of back,
Mhm.
people don't also want to learn. They're all, I feel like, at least in my schooling, I didn't learn how to I learned how everything was compartmentalized to teach, and I didn't really learn how to put things together when I have a program that just teaches this one thing and then moves on to the next thing and then moves on to the next thing. So I
Mhm.
not to give excuses that we haven't learned how to do that. I think it's one of those unfortunate things that like a whole school system would have to decide to do that all together, right? I mean, that
Yes.
would have to be leadership and everyone making that kind of
And a
educated
conscious choice is
decision
to
to
give
move
the
on.
teachers the time and agency to do that.
Mhm.
Right,
Well, and having that,
right.
that opportunity to recognize first, like things are not the same. So I think
Mhm.
there's that piece of it. I think for me, I'll speak from my perspective. I was thinking, this time last year, I have family in the medical community, so they were just beginning to get vaccinated in that first wave, and I was like, of vaccines, and I was like, okay, like light at the end of the tunnel. This could be like yay, with like maybe things will be better a year from now, and we're still in this like in and out kind of moment. I mean, we're up in the Boston area, and there's an entire school who's closed now for the next 10 days because they just had so many cases that it's done. So again, an interruption. So I think like my own children are constantly feeling like, oh, at what point is this all going to fall apart again? And so
Mhm.
there's not there's not this consistency that we can kind of think of, and then like, oh, well, just everything will be back to normal. We'll expect the same high stakes testing. We're
That
going to
I think
the same,
that was part of the problem, and I don't know,
yeah.
Mhm.
Brianna, if you're seeing this where you are, but I mean, people around here for the most part went back full time, 100% of
Mhm.
students, and the expectation I think by most was that, oh, we're going back to normal, but nobody's normal. you know
Nobody's normal, yes, and nobody's normal, and also, what about the normal was
Was
working
good.
so well that we
right,
are so desperate to cling on to it
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
not
because
because
we've
it
been
was
having
working,
these
but because it was easy, because we knew how to do it.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
We knew
And
how to
working for adults, working
Mm,
for adults, maybe not so much working for kids in a
right.
lot of situations. So things that feel comfortable, just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's right.
Mhm.
And so there's those pieces, and I don't know. I had hoped at the beginning of this that we would take a deep breath and think about
Mhm.
like what things really matter and what things really count within the world of education, that, our little sphere and our larger spheres of education, and that this would be an opportunity to really examine
Mhm.
the structures and have a redo, right?
Mhm.
Where everyone globally has this opportunity to think about things different. But I almost feel like that opportunity is slipping.
It is slipping. I
And
agree.
like we're losing that opportunity to really think about, okay, what counts, what matters, what opportunities we provide for students, and we're just going back to like, oh, let's just move everyone through this factory of education as quickly as
Mhm.
possible, versus
Yeah. But
really,
that's part of it, though, right? Like you said it, that everybody just wants to fill in the gaps of like, what did we miss, and we have to do that right away. We have to get to that. There's just such a sense of urgency, and I don't really. Everyone's in the same spot for them. I mean, the whole country is competing against who? Like,
Exactly.
we're-
Exactly.
I don't know.
and I don't know if like you have the answer to this, but in your research, are there countries that are doing this well? Like, is there somewhere that we should be looking to like as a better model?
You know, I hesitate to say better because I think we won't know what models are
True.
better
Mhm.
until we, get further out of it, because we're trying to say what's better while we're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But, with some examples, in Kenya, they said no matter where you were last year when we went out, so that everybody has equitable access to where they're at, they wiped out the year and started everyone back to where they were before and said, we're not going to double anything. Yeah.
Mhm.
We are not going to double. We're just going to have a do-over. Now, is that
Mhm.
better or not? Who's to say?
Mhm.
But it certainly is different.
Mhm.
And it's
Um,
also seeming it feels a little bit less urgent.
yes.
I mean, at least the way that you described it feels to me less urgent than what we are trying to do.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, very much. So, yes, very, very much less urgent. So we can look at that response. There are some nations too that are still looking at with the development. Although we have outsourced a lot of our education development to corporations,
Mhm. Mhm.
in some nations that's been done through their governments. And developing those online tools.
Mhm.
So, with those, there has been more of a continuity of continuing those same digital resources because they are still housed within the education system.
Mhm.
So, I think that's another place that we're seeing our teachers struggle is maybe there is something new, like Molly, that you were talking about, that you learn so much new and you don't want to learn new anymore, because all of a sudden what you learn now has a cost associated with it
Mhm.
that used to be free.
Mhm.
And if you want to continue that new thing that you were doing in your classroom, now you have to find the money for it.
You know what? I
So
forgot about that.
Yeah.
yes, so that, I mean, well, that's huge. There was a lot of
Mhm.
tools that went free
Yep.
as a pandemic
Yeah.
emergency that now that we are back are no longer free. So everything that many shifted to, they've
Mhm.
now had to shift ear back or pivot again to something else
Mhm.
because it's no longer free. So
Or
there
find the
are,
money.
yes, or find the money.
Mhm.
Yeah, so there are nations that, because of how those tools are developed, it's carrying through. So I say make it a plea to administrators, but I'm also making a plea to funding
Mhm.
resources that, okay, we've been hooked. There's
Mhm.
good stuff out there. So I try to continually promote those free resources,
Mhm.
that have stayed free.
Mm.
But there is a lot out there that is a school going to keep up licenses for different LMSs that have these embedded systems
Mhm.
for online learning. Every
Mhm.
school district has its different level of funding. So that's another thing that some
Mhm.
other nations don't have the same challenge on. Now, it may not have all the bells and whistles,
Mhm.
but there is at least consistency in the technology.
Mhm.
Got it. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. I mean, that happened to my own kids because there were a number of things that were available in that spring that I was like,
Yeah.
okay, let's figure out what we're gonna do, and that we used, and then yeah, it all went away.
Yeah. I mean, I've had my own, at the university I'm at now, I've had students who are in the classroom who are getting their masters, and they're coming to me saying that their school had to switch learning management systems mid-pandemic because of cost issues.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about, putting more into teachers there,
Mhm.
that's another thing. So if we are going to
Mhm.
move forward and bring things forward, the more things that are free and look like they're going to stay free,
Mhm.
like our Desmoses, like our GeoGebras, like our
Mhm.
toy theaters,
Yeah.
you know, that it becomes problematic to focus on so many new things that aren't free versus sticking with things that we know are going to be, because we
Right.
may
Mhm.
lose funds at any time.
Mhm.
Ugh, so many things to stress about.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yes.
Oh.
But
I
yeah, but to keep it positive, but when you look at the community that has developed over this pandemic, not just nationally, but globally, of so many teachers moving away from their own paywalls and
Mhm.
putting things out there free for each other to use. I think
Mhm.
we've developed a community of educators and especially math educators in a way that we haven't seen before. And between that, I was on the PhET simulation site the other day out of UC Boulder, and just looking at how many new teacher activities using physical science and mathematics simulations have been added for K through undergrad
Mhm.
and in 3 languages too,
Mhm.
Wow.
and that's all free.
Mhm.
It's amazing.
So the amount of educational crowdsourcing that has taken place is incredible.
Mhm.
So there is positive,
Yeah.
that we are
Yeah,
coming together as a community.
that's for sure. That's for sure. Really get that in the hands of teachers, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So this is going back to my original question, which was not necessarily no, or like my one of my questions. So
Oh, about statistics.
yes, because okay, so statistics is one of those things. Okay, so we primarily work in K-12, and
Mhm.
Molly and I like work more even in the K-8 realm. And so while I, as an adult who tries to be like conscious about the media that I look at and think about things in critical ways,
Mhm.
100% see the need for an understanding of statistics and data analysis, etc.
Mhm.
I was also the person who was not going to take those things in college. um, but I feel like, so like if we're thinking about things that get lost during a
Right.
pandemic, right?
Mhm.
Or the things that go, even in a non-pandemic year. So like
Mhm.
even prior to, I always feel like those are either the standards that we get to very last,
Yes.
or like I call them the oh crap weeks, like right before we're high stake testing, we're like, oh crap, I haven't done these things. And we like shove it all in there and,
Mhm.
just a little bit, and then we don't touch it again. Like, how do we fix that? All that for me.
Okay, so I need to fix that and get world peace. Okay, I got
Right.
time.
If
Here. No.
you could do that, that would really be amazing. We'll have you back on the show if you do that.
Oh gosh. Okay, no pressure here. So the wonderful thing about statistics, I mean, there's a lot of wonderful things, but it's something that can be integrated across the
Mhm.
Mhm.
mathematics curriculum, across the science curriculum, across your social studies curriculum throughout the year so that it doesn't need to be so standalone in the
Mhm.
oh crap weeks at
Yeah.
the end. So especially when we're looking at the topics that we end up covering in the K-8 realm.
Right.
So when we're looking at those ideas of K-8 statistics,
Mhm.
data science, and data interpretation, things are thrown in there like how do students create bar graphs,
Mhm.
histograms, pie chart? You can do that about almost
Yeah.
anything. And that's what's so beautiful about it. So, especially for my elementary teachers, if you're looking at them doing science or you're looking at them doing social studies or they're reading something interesting, start integrating it across the curriculum early and you can embed those
Mhm.
standards so it's not so standalone.
Mhm.
Things like finding the mean and the median and the mode can be done in your PE classes.
Mhm.
When you're looking at scores and shots, bring it to the conversation for everybody. Statistics does not have to be siloed. And
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons that I do love it so much. So when we're leaving it for the end, we are doing a lot of shoving for the
Mhm.
topics.
Mhm.
But if we can add it in earlier and more often, then our students are going to be not just good at those topics for the testing time, but they're going to become better consumers of data, which is
Mhm.
something that we really need to see a different push for. And I mean, I'll plug my home state right now that the state of Virginia is actually in the middle of revamping their mathematics curriculum
Mhm.
to include more data science and have a data science pathway through for K
Mhm.
12. And it's in development now. And I think that's going to be something that'll be very, very meaningful. But when we're looking at the national standards, these are easy things to plug into your current events, to bring into your readings, to bring into your sciences, and not make it so standalone, and to even bring it into the different math topics. So if you are a math teacher and you're trying to say, wait, when am I going to put that in? Well, if you're teaching fractions and proportional reasoning, you're already stepping into the realm of probability. Take it that
Mhm.
one step further, look at that application. It makes sense. If you're teaching percentages and you're working with your class in percentage,
Mhm.
show them that old school graphic of the pie chart from a famous news source
Mhm.
that if you just Google image search bad graph, you'll find it. That doesn't add up to 100% and talk
Yeah.
about why that's impactful when we're
Mhm.
talking about what percentages means. And if you're talking about percentages, let's add in language into it as well and really go across the curriculum. What does cent mean? Where does that root word come from?
Mhm.
Why is that hundred so important? Where else do we see that? Now we're bringing in our English language learning students as well as our native speakers into the conversation.
Mhm.
So statistics doesn't have to be at the end.
Mhm.
A little
Mhm.
bits and pieces can be in everything. And that's going to make it a lot easier along the way.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
during times of elections that we just went through in November, I mean, how much should we start talking about margin of error in different
Mhm.
elections? That's a stair
Mhm.
step to confidence intervals.
Mhm.
So if we get that terminology in early just because it is all around us, it's not going to feel so ugh at the end
Mm.
and crammed because we're already used to its creation because it's been in everything. And that's
Mhm.
why it's so beautiful.
Right, but that's why it's also so necessary too,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I think it became glaringly evident that people are generally weak in that area during the pandemic because all you
Absolutely.
saw on the TV was
Mhm.
statistics and graphs and every day.
Mhm.
So,
Yes. And it's interesting you bring that up too. In the nation of Botswana in sub-Saharan Africa, they saw something similar in the early 90s with the HIV/AIDS epidemic.
Interesting.
And that was their nation was very much ravaged by it. And what the Ministry of Education there did in response was actually integrated information about HIV/AIDS with a heavy emphasis on HIV/AIDS statistics across the curriculum starting at the elementary level. And that
Mm.
became a ministry decree. And they actually added in 1995 that plus environmentalism and information technology as a theme through the schooling. And you still see that to this day. So now that we are in our own
Mhm.
pandemic and seeing, like you were saying, how people are shaky in their interpretation of data, this
Mhm.
might be a time to start saying, well, let's see how we can infuse that across all subjects. And even if it's not done on a national level, that's something as teachers that we can
Mhm.
do
mm,
along the way too to make that change. Because
especially if you're
that's,
an
yes,
elementary school teacher and you teach everything, you have
mhm,
you you're in charge of it all. You
in
can do
charge of it
that.
all. Yes. And when it all becomes so overwhelming, what are topics that are already inherently in themselves have
Mhm.
so many different subject matters in them? It makes it
Mhm.
less overwhelming and more impactful for the student.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Good
So,
stuff. Good
yeah.
stuff.
How can people learn more about you and the work that you are doing?
Well, call me. No, okay, good. You can actually follow me on Twitter. I
Mhm.
think there's my Twitter handle right there, which is at Brianna A. Kurtz. Had to use my middle initial. Someone else came in there.
Got in there first.
If you are a conference goer, I will be presenting in a couple weeks here at the NCTM virtual conference about some educational lessons from around the globe in mathematics, along with Dr. Hilary Tank out of Utah State University. So we'll be jointly presenting about what different nations have done in response. And I'll also be appearing with NCTM Regional in New Orleans come spring, and the research conference on mathematical learning. So I'd look forward to meeting anybody there that's around, but that's my Twitter handle. If you find yourself in Virginia, come on by. I love to keep these conversations going.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We really appreciate it. And I feel like this is an ongoing conversation. I don't want this conversation to slip away. I really think more school systems need to be having this conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the more we talk about, especially as educators, the more people will listen. So
Right.
Right.
And there's like this time, there's a small group of people, I think, in this community who are really well prepared for this time. And you're one of those people who was prepared, and it may have been a niche at the time, but right now
that only lasted 3 weeks.
In it. so using that expertise that you bring to the table is so critical at the point.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful talking to you both tonight. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, that was great. I hope some of the stuff that she talked about actually really comes into play, because we really need it.
Yeah, no, it's good lessons too. I think we have to take these opportunities to kind of reflect on what's actually happening and slow down a little bit and learn from things that are being done. So
absolutely. Well, our next show is not until December 1st, because we are in November and we have some holidays coming up, where we will be interviewing Dr. Kendall Brown and Dr. Pamela Seda. And we're very excited about that, as we always are with our guests.
So we hope you will join us then. It's going to be a really exciting discussion. And we thank you for joining us this evening. And we hope that you will keep math creative, curious, and inclusive for all. And we'll see you later.
Bye-bye.